Hello everyone, I am teacher Myra. Today we're gonna talk about the reproduction of flowering plants and non-flowering plants. When we say plants, what comes to your mind? Yes, these are living things that produce oxygen that we breathe, and also they exchange for carbon dioxide when they will need it. Sometimes there are plants that rely on pollinators or the insect so they can enable the fertilization, and some plants rely on spores for reproducing by the help of the environment like weather. So are we good? Let's go. Can you see the graphic there, the chart down right there? Yes, in plant is the above. Now the plants has two categories, which is the flowering plants, and the another one, second category, is a non-flowering plants. Let's tackle first the flowering plants. These are only one category. Below it is the angiosperm. In angiosperm, there are 5 common. First is the flower, grains, shrub, fruits, and lastly the vegetables. Understood? Now let's move on to the second category. Bring back again to the non-flowering plants. So in the non-flowering plants, there are another branch, which is the gymnosperm and the spore-producing plants. But let's move first in the gymnosperm. So in a gymnosperm, there is the conifer. Now move on to the second category, which is the spore-producing plants. There are 3 which is the fern, mosses, and lastly the liverworts. So next is we're gonna tackle first, and let's us understand the flowering plants. Are we ready? Are we good? Let's go. So before we proceed to the flowering plants, what is the plant anyway? At the top of the chart? Yes, plants contains specialized tissue for plant survival. They are responsible for the photosynthesis, like collecting sunlight and converting to sugar, and collecting minerals from the soil, and also collecting water. Now let's proceed now to the flowering plants. Here we are in the flowering plants. Now what is flowering plants? There is a reproductive part of plants called a flower. It is actually bright and colorful, enough to attract the pollinators. Now the seeds are the way of reproduction. Mostly we usually plant it, but sometimes it will drop from its parent plant and to grow a new plant. They rely on pollinators such as small birds like hummingbirds and insects, especially the bees, to enable the fertilization. They are important in our environment. So like for example, it creates some fruits, vegetables, just like that, so we can consume, and also for the animals. Here we are in the angiosperm under the flowering plant. What is the angiosperm? When a flower gets pollinated, it produces the fruit, while these are seeds inside. There are 5 common angiosperm. Examples are flowers, grains, shrubs, fruits, and finally the vegetables. That's gonna be tackled next. Let's move on to the first common angiosperm, which is the flowers. from the angiosperm plant, which is responsible for producing fruits and the seeds. Like within a one plant, there are plenty to only one single flower. For example, is the sunflower, tulips, and peace lily. Let's move on to the second one, which is the grapes. Another name is cereal. It is a type of crust where its seeds can be eaten, and it's for the starchy substance where the flour becomes a food, especially when we love to eat it. For example, rice, corn, and oats. Let's proceed to the third one, which is the shrubs, also called bushes, which have one stem that has a lot of branches. Within this plant, there are plenty or cluster of flowers. For example, common hibiscus, bougainvillea, and oleander that can be found everywhere, especially in the road. To the fourth one, which is the fruits, which is the ovary of the flower, whose seeds are the ovules. There are sometimes different flavors within the fruit that we consume. For example, mango as sour or sweet, apple for sweet, and guava for sometimes sourly flavor. And the final part of common angiosperm, which is the vegetables. A lot of its parts are edible and can be consumed, like from its roots, leaves, stem, and even its within its fruit. For example, which is my favorite, is cabbage. Second is the carrot and the potato. Now we're done in flowering plants, but what is the under of flowering plants again? Which is the angiosperm. Now, what are the 5 common angiosperms? Yes, this is the flower, grains, shrubs, fruits, and vegetables. Now, let's move on to the non-flowering plants. Here we are to the second category, which is the non-flowering plants. A plant absent of flower and reproduce through asexual. Now, for example, like though they don't have flower, but some trees uses its cone, or sometimes other plants rely on wind to spread out their seeds to continue to grow a new plant. There were 2 categories, mainly conifer and spore-producing plants. Here we are under the non-flowering plants, which is the gymnosperm. They rely on the surroundings, which are weather or anything that aren't insect to reproduce or to enable fertilization. Sometimes they rely on strong weather like wind to blow away their seeds, or sometimes flood to make sure they flow from the far distance to grow a new plant. They use seeds instead of spurs. One example for this is the conifer. Now, under the gymnosperm, which is the conifer, which means bearing cones. The cone protects and keeps the seeds. The male cone produces pollen carried by wind, and it will land on the female cone to create seeds. As the new seed slowly mature, the shell acts as a defense. For example, for this like pine trees, fear and the redwood. The cone looks like a brown like this, and it is very strong to avoid being destructive by either animals from under any disasters. Let's move on to the spore producing plants, which is under in the non-flowering plants. A plant with no flower relies on a special part for producing spores. For example, fern, mosses, and liverwort. Let's proceed to the first part of spore producing plants, which is the first. The spore can be seen under its leaves called the fronds, the big leaf. So there's a brown spot, which is the sorry, where the spore are released. Behind the big plant, the leaf, behind it, there's a brown spot or really small dots where the spore released through the wind. Let's move on to the second one, which is the mosses. They grow a few inches in height and grow in clumps. The spore were produced inside of the capsules. Yes, you see that looks like a grass. Then at the top of the grass there's a capsule where it produces the spores. Let's move on to the final part of spore producing, which is the liverworts. A plant resembles a liver, and the word wort means plant. The sporangium where it releases if it is mature. But before we end this lecture, I would like to go back from the top. Now, in plants, what are those two categories? Yes, it is the flowering plants and non-flowering plants. Now, in flowering plants, what are those one category? Yes, it is the angiosperm. Now, what are the 5 angiosperm? Yes, there are flower, grains, shrubs, fruits, and vegetable. Let's move on to the non-flowering plants. There are 2 categories. This is the gymnosperm. Under the gymnosperm, there is the conifer. Move on to the another category, which is the spore-producing plants. Now, what are those 3 spore-producing plants? Yes, which is the fern, mosses, and liverworts. So that's it for the reproduction of flowering plants and non-flowering plants. I am Teacher Myra. Thank you for listening.